Hello, Exiles. This is Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming, and welcome to another Path of Exile video. In today's video, I'm going to do a frequently asked questions. Unfortunately, the POB hasn't been updated yet, so I can't do the new tree and the new setup, I guess, for the Frost Blades Heatshiver Trickster League Starter. But as soon as that gets up, I'll get to it. Currently, I want to do some frequently asked questions because a lot of questions get asked very frequently, and I just don't want to go through all the comments and answer them all individually. So instead, I'm going to answer them all in a video. The three most common ones I looked at and the ones that I want to get answered are whether or not we're still going to be using Nightblade, why Trickster over other Ascendancy classes, and what to level with now that Spectral Helix has been nerfed. And I'll get over all that. I currently have my Trade League version of the build from my very first video. Just as reference, I'm going to go over some of these things both subjectively, talking about how they specifically affect this build and my later versions of the build that I built, and objectively, how, like, for instance, Nightblade just objectively stacks up to other support gems on pretty much any build, but very specifically this build overall through all of its stages of progression. So we're going to go ahead and get into that. So I'll pull up my little sheet here. So first of all, for Nightblade, whether or not we're still going to use it, and I'm also going to have timestamps. So if you want something specifically, you can look through that. But specifically for Nightblade, I have my subjective numbers here, which are with Nightblade on this version of the build, what my crit multi is, along with like the avoid damage and crit percentage is going to be with and without elusive. Specifically with and without Nightblade. You can check those specifically. I have the new number set to the average since we have a max of 220. Our effective elusive on average is going to be 110, so I have it set there. Previously, with Withering Step Reset, it was at about 180 or so, give or take. And as you can see, that is a drastic drop, but you also have to keep in mind you can take this new 110 number and multiply this final DPS number by the 28% or so that you'll be gaining from the buffs to Frost Blades. And the new number, when I calculated it, was 39.5 million. So it's actually more damage on average than it was even with the Withering Step Reset. So interesting stuff there. But regardless, whether or not Nightblade is worth using, I'm going to keep going into it. Elusive average with Withering at 180% is 749 multi, 27% avoid damage, and obviously the crit chance is going to be the same, so I'm not going to cover that every time. Elusive average without Withering is 110%, and that's 623 multi, 16.5% chance to avoid damage. A 2120 crit damage support provides 159 crit multi, I believe. I think I wrote that down properly. I have it right here. Oh, sorry. It's 150, so it's less than I thought. I must have had a little typo there. So it provides 150% crit multi with no additional benefits. The point at which crit damage gem adds more multi is about 80% effect. And we can see that here. If we have it currently set up at 110%. If we remove it, we are at 425. We should get 150 with the crit damage put on. So I guess we don't even have to take off Nightblade, but we'll do so. And we put that on, it'll go to 575. So we gain exactly 150. At what point do we gain less than 150? From our elusive with Nightblade on? It's right around 80%. Yeah, so 80% elusive. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, however, and that covers just around a third of the entire duration of elusive. So for the bottom third, you'll have less crit multi than you would get if you have the crit multi gem or the crit damage gem. Nightblade takes almost exactly 10 seconds to fall off from 220%. I looked at my footage and timed it and watched it several times, which means it loses about 22% effect per second, but it seems to always be in multiples of 5. So it's not going to be at some weird odd number at any point. About 4 seconds to fall off from 80%, less than 4 seconds, because previously I had 90% because I miscalculated the numbers, meaning multi still gives more, or Nightblade still gives more multi 60% of the time, and always provides you with other benefits. Crit damage support deals more damage at 55% elusive, which is about 2.5 seconds remaining in your elusive before it resets again. But once again, at 55% elusive, we still get 8% chance to avoid damage, 17% move speed, and the 1.1 base crit is always going to be the same because that is separate and not affected by the Nightblade or the elusive effect. So once we go down to 55% elusive, we are at 26 million. Almost exactly 26 million. If we remove Nightblade, put on crit damage, actually it's even worse than that, even with 2120 crit damage. And this is actually going to be more pronounced if you don't have a 2120 crit damage support. So maybe it's actually like, yeah, it's right around 50%. So once again, I kind of botched the numbers a little bit because I did an estimation, but 50%, which is probably just over 2. It's probably like 2.2 or 2.3 seconds remaining. So the percentage at which we have higher DPS with Nightblade is quite high. It is over 75% of the time. So 75% of the time, Nightblade is objectively better than crit damage, and most of the remaining time, it's still subjectively better because we do still get the base crit chance, which is really important in the build, because getting as close to 100% crit means we're going to freeze, which means we're going to get the extra Heatshiver damage, which is huge, and we also get even minor damage avoid and move speed is going to be better. So almost the entire time it's up, even with a very minor amount of elusive, it's going to be subjectively better than Nightblade, and it's just purely objectively better in terms of damage, greater than 75% of the time. The next best damage support in my current setup, which once again, this is subjective and maybe you might have to look through a POB of your own character to figure it out, but mine is Awakened added cold damage. So if we are to remove Nightblade here and we pull this down, technically it's actually Awakened, well, you'll see Awakened Elemental Focus, but we absolutely can't run this because this will actually make it so that we can't, we'll actually lose like 50 to 60% of our damage if we have this realistically. But here, as you can see, we'll go down to a 520 Awakened added cold damage, which this might take you a while to get, by the way. You're going to have to level this up. And it's actually much worse if we don't have the +1 gem level, because that is going to add almost 1 million damage, and it's actually going to add more than that because the damage effectiveness is going up. So instead of gaining 4.15% more damage per gem level, we're going to gain like 5.5%. So it's actually it's going to be more significant. But even with that, 25, just short of 26 million. At what point does Nightblade outpace that? Well, we're actually pretty close already. So we have to do multiples of 5. It's going to be, I think this should match. Yeah, which is better than Nightblade DPS from 65% on down. So basically, yeah, once I set this up to 65, from there, and even with that, that's factoring in the buff more than likely. So once added cold is damaged or buffed in terms of the damage effectiveness that Frost Blades will, or Awakened added cold, in terms of the amount of that Frost Blades will gain from being level 21, it'll be around 65 on down. So that means that, and yeah, I do cover that here, that it'll scale harder. So it might end up being maybe up to 75 elusive effect on down, which is still 65% or 60% of the time. It's still going to be weaker than Nightblade. And once again, it also does not add those additional benefits very similarly. So kind of the end all be all, Nightblade is still going to 100% be the best support. Now, my leveling guide, I'm going to change the order in which I add it. So it's not going, previously Nightblade was so good we put it on our 4 link. Now we're going to put it as our 5th link after elemental damage with attacks. So these first 4 are going to be our priority, and Nightblade's going to be our 5th link priority, followed by Trinity later on if you can freeze. Otherwise, you know, hypothermia, crit multi, or something like that. Some other 6th link after that. Trinity, though, is going to be the end one when we're able to freeze basically everything. So that just goes over everything. So yes, Nightblade is still subjectively way, way, way better than any other link for the slot, and objectively most of the time better than most links, just generally speaking. And in a 6th link, you're still going to find you're still going to have a hard time in any Nightblade build that previously used it, finding a better 5th or 6th link more than likely. So that's pretty much my coverage on Nightblade. So the short answer is yes, we're still using Nightblade. It's still insanely powerful. In fact, my very first video, when you look through it, I did not run Withering Step, and I was able to easily, very, very, very easily clear all the content without using Withering Step to reset it, because I was lazy. Not because it wasn't great, because obviously I started doing it later. But once you reach a certain point, it is... I was just too lazy to do it. So now we're going to go into why we use Trickster. So think about Trickster. It has a couple of benefits that just outright eclipse a lot of things, particularly for this build or any build that, well, we'll just go over this one by one. So Polymath provides, in this particular version of the build, 30% more damage, which is 75% of the Berserker's aspect of Carnage, which gives 40% more damage. However, Polymath doesn't have a downside. 10% increased damage taken is a pretty big downside. Also, not only does it not have a downside, it has the upside of one of the best quality of life sustain out of anything. So we're recovering 10% in this current setup of life, energy shield, and mana for every time we kill, on top of getting 30% more damage. This is insane. So there's not... having separate sources of more damage is always going to be insanely more powerful than adding more of a previous more multiplier, whether that be added damage or anything really like that, like adding just higher multipliers to your previous more damage multipliers. Basically, the numbers have to get insanely high before they match an additional more multiplier, and all of those previously additive multipliers can basically be caught up with by Trickster. The other ascendancies that do have more multipliers available are things like Frigid Wake on Occultist, which is 15% more cold damage, which is half as much as we're getting on Trickster. Now, there are other benefits, but yeah, it's a smaller multiplier. Then you have a class down here in Slayer that technically has 2 more damage multipliers, actually kind of 3. So you have Impact, which is 15% more multiplier based on proximity. You have Bane of Legends, which is 20% more against unique enemies. And you actually have Headsman, which is 20% Cull, which is functionally a more multiplier as well. That means Slayer could potentially eclipse the damage, and Berserker actually has an additional more multiplier as well. It's just kind of gated behind Insane Gearing, and Blitz, where it's a more multiplier to attack speed, which scales even harder with the previous more damage multiplier with multi-strike. So you have a couple of these things, but these all have kind of drawbacks. First of all, their placement on the tree. You're not going to be able to as easily as you could see it if you watched my Does It Heatshiver Champion video. It's going to be harder to get over to a lot of the stuff you need over here on Slayer. So even though the damage potential is really there, you're kind of like wasting a lot of points getting over without a lot of benefit. There's not a ton of stuff near this area besides easier access to the Savagery, which still requires a decent amount of points to get to, that is going to be benefited. And that's not the only benefit that Trickster has. So let's see what I say. So yeah, you reach 75% of the power of Berserker's more multi and double the Occultists with the current tree. Another thing is we're always with exact same gear, we're always going to have one more frenzy charge than anybody else. No other build has +2 frenzy charges. There are plenty of builds with +1. But I should actually probably explain, well, I guess I want to give like an overview of everything first, and then I'll go into more detail why this additional more multiplier eventually outpaces things like the Raider or the Inquisitor, because there's a very like simple explanation as to why, but I think you want to understand like all 4 of these nodes that we're taking before I really explain that. So Swift Killer, +2 maximum frenzy charges, 200% charge duration. The 200% charge duration is very quality of life. I think I cover that here as well. The utility of 200% charge duration means low percentage chance to gain charge on hit will keep them up, along with potential to generate charges through Eldritch Influence Armor, as the duration is higher than the time to generate. So for instance, if you wanted to get endurance charges and you wanted to get the gain an endurance charge every 15 seconds, which is very easy to get because it's a lesser, so it uses the lowest influence or the lowest currency, which is fairly common, you can do so. Also, we can do things like this. So 10% chance to gain frenzy charge when you hit your marked enemy. That 10%, when we're attacking 7.61 times per second, and combined with our duration means we're almost certainly going to be able to generate the charges at a high enough rate to keep them on, because we're going to have over 30 seconds, including like the frenzy charge duration we have here. We're going to have over 30 seconds to keep our frenzy charges up. If you look at any of my videos, I pretty much, after a certain point, always have max frenzy charges. And of course, this is also Ice Bite. Now, secondly, is Ice Bite itself. Supported skills have 17 to 25 added cold damage per frenzy charge. That's pretty much like a jewelry roll of added cold damage per frenzy charge, and we're always going to have one more than everybody else. So basically guaranteeing that we're going to have that extra bit of flat damage on top of just like the extra bonus of, you know, increasing our more multiplier and everything like that. So just holistically, that is kind of the reason why this is so powerful. I think there's also frenzy charge duration on this as well. Yeah, so that's pretty huge. I think we end up with like 34-second frenzy charge duration. And then one step ahead, 8% action speed is a Tailwind Boot modifier. We always have it. I think I have a little bit more to say about that here somewhere. I do want to talk about this part, but I think it's better on the end. Action speed being set at Tailwind Boots level along with mini temp chains aura. So previously, if you use temp chains on Uber bosses and Pinnacle bosses, it only slowed them by like 8%. This is actually more than that, so you were better off just standing near them with one step ahead than you were casting temp chains if you wanted to slow them. We also have 30% chill, so this very quickly becomes a non-issue, but it is a little added bonus. But the big thing is the our action speed's always 108%. That means so action speed being set, we have free freeze, chill, temp chains, and other effect immunity. There's other stuff like the sand pits when you fight the scorpion boss, the basilisk boss stare, Elder's grasp where he like stares at you and locks you into place. You're not slowed by that, so you can just easily run behind him. Uber Elder does have a guaranteed freeze that seems to work through this, but almost everything else that reduces your action speed is not a big deal. I mean, there's things like grasping vines, but you just use dash to get out of that. And I haven't really tested the Uber Elder that much to like really know how well this works against it. But that's really huge. And basically just having free tailwind on top of all of that. Like, these are all huge benefits individually. I mean, people were used to take the Berserker or sorry, not Berserker. People used to take the Juggernaut just to get Unstoppable, which is pretty much just worse on almost every level, except for the fact that it also grants you stun immunity. But people used to take that or Calm's Boots just to gain the similar kind of effect. This just gives it to us on top of us getting free tailwind all the time. And lastly, we'll go to Heartstopper. Heartstopper is twice as good as Fortify half of the time, and it's the best anti-dot in the game the other half of the time. Like 40% less damage from dots. I played Champion, which has Fortify up all the time. You could feel the difference with the dots. Definitely. You can also stack this with other less damage taken, like Fortify. It's very easy to get Fortify. I have it on all of my builds. You can get this through corrupting a weapon, through Eldritch influence on body armor. There's a bunch of ways to get it. You can also stack it with things like Wind Dancer or Kintsugi, and less multipliers multiply in the same way more multipliers do, and then they multiply further with less damage taken. This can make us insanely tanky, and we have backup defensive options for the times where we're not being benefited by Heartstopper. But when we are benefiting from the particular part of Heartstopper, we're basically taking no damage. For instance, if we have Fortified and the less damage on a hit taken, and we get hit by a spell, and we also have 100% chance to spell suppress 53% of damage, we're functionally taking 0 damage from spells through all of that. Something to keep in mind. Like, that is so much less damage taken that it might as well be nothing. Especially, we have our resistances on top of that as well. So, why is this all important? I wanted to give you like a holistic thing. Like, these are all extremely powerful. I think Trickster is one of the best ascendancies in the game right now, just as generically. And that's not even getting into this stuff, which is also all very good. Just like you could potentially get like a Soul Drinker version of this build and use Energy Leech and benefit from both modifiers. Then you could be running Trinity, Nightblade, and Energy Leech, benefiting from both of its modifiers, meaning you would have some of the best more multipliers on your damage links that you could possibly have available. That'd be pretty cool, but this is like, mirror tier worthy level stuff before you start getting into like Soul Drinker territory. So I wouldn't recommend trying to do that, but you could do this build with that in mind. And honestly, Spellbreaker is pretty insane too, and has really crazy synergy with Wicked Ward, which makes it so that spell energy shield recharge isn't interrupted by damage if recharge began recently. We can basically, every time we spell suppress, we can basically just restart. So there's like, even outside of the things I'm not taking, every single node except for maybe this one, which is okay in very specific circumstances, is absolutely crazy on Trickster. So why is it better than like Raider? So in order to figure that out, or Inquisitor, I'm going to pull up my calculations here. So let's start with Raider, because that's the one I get asked about often. So if we look here, In terms of generic main hand total increased, we have 297%. And then specific to cold damage, which includes elemental damage, and there's no overlap. You can check for yourself in these. These do not seem to overlap. They're separate, basically. So you add these two together, it ends up being what, like 750-ish increased damage. Let's say you have the exact same amount of charges minus 1 on a raider, which would put us at 8 frenzy charges. Okay. So the benefit here would be from Avatar of the Slaughter, which gives us 4% increased movement speed per frenzy charge, which is not insignificant. Although we do whirling blades everywhere, so I guess it is. The real big are from the other ones, though. The increased evasion, which is nice, but I don't think it outclasses Heartstopper defensively, although there's some other defensive benefits, which I'll talk about. And then the 4% increased attack speed and attack damage. Now, with 8 frenzy charges, that means we are getting 32% increased attack speed and 80% increased attack damage. The problem is these are not more multipliers. They are additive on top of our already increased damage. So we already have 75% increased damage. And we already have a decent amount of attack rate as well on top of that. So these are going to have diminishing returns on top of what we already have. We're going to get 12% increased on our added damage. And then I don't know if there's a good way. Oh, here it is. Increased attack speed and main hand increased attack speed. Are these separates? Let's see. Mod flag, skill awakened, multi-strike. Is that on here? It's not. So these would be added together to be about 185 or 183 increased attack speed. Adding another 30 something is like a what? God, I'm bad at math. Something, let's just say like 15 to 20%. I guess I could calculate it, but it's a 15-20% increase, which is also significant. So you get like a 12% increase to added damage and like a 15 to 20% increase to attack speed. Once again, these have diminishing returns, and there is a limit on attack time of 10 attacks per second as well. So it's possible that reaching that point will be possible with Raider, but it's just not going to outscale a more damage multiplier. The 30%, and there is no more damage multiplier available on Raider. So it'll be easier to gear and easier to get through like the middle game, like white to early yellow maps. But once you start getting gear, the other benefit is there's a slightly less hoops to run through as you get a free 40% spell suppression. So once again, Raider is easier to start with than that. And the one thing that Raider does have that you can't really get on the Trickster is the 50% chance to avoid elemental ailments while phasing. Now, Ignite is pretty much a non-factor just generally, especially considering we take the less Ignite duration Pantheon most of the time to get immunity to Burning Ground, and also with Heartstopper on top of that. But the important thing is avoid shock. It is hard for us to deal with shock currently as Trickster, but even that we're going to have options for because of the jewel changes. Now we'll be able to get chance to avoid shock on jewels. And there's unique jewels, which could potentially very easily give us 100% either reduced effect or a chance to avoid shock. But in the previous patch, Avatar of the Veil provides us that. The 20% exposure actually isn't a big deal because we get 18% just for the cost of 1 mastery, which is also giving us more damage by taking this mastery. We're getting exposure through our Hydrosphere, which is 10%, and we're buffing it up to 18%. So we're losing 5%. Or basically for our base 50% less exposure, we're making up for 90% of that loss by simply taking 1 mastery point. Basically everything that the Raider can do will eventually be outclassed by gear for Trickster. Like gaining frenzy charges on hit is going to be outclassed by the fact that we have the duration to keep them up permanently. And that also extends to power charges. So I forgot to mention this. Assassin's Mark on hit with quality at 20% quality gets 5% chance to gain power charges on hit, and also gives you a power charge when you slay an enemy that was cursed, which means every time you kill a rare, you will get a power charge, which will stay on you for 30 seconds. And then every time you hit an enemy, you have a 5% chance. We're hitting pretty frequently. Chances are good we're going to be maintaining full power charges even in boss fights as well because of that. So not only do we make up for the weaknesses that we have by not having this kind of frenzy charge duration, but we actually overwhelm them by having those benefits apply to other charge types. If you have 5% to gain a frenzy charge on hit, if you happen to not yet have the Storm Rider, for instance, or not Storm Rider, where is it? Oh yeah, Storm Rider. If you happen to not yet have Storm Rider from a medium cluster jewel, you're not going to be able to keep power charges up on Raider. But you'll be able to do it simply with having quality on your Assassin's Mark on hit with the Trickster. So that's just, so there's a lot of quality of life, and you just have harder scaling because of that inherent more multiplier that once again is 75% of the power of one of the most powerful ascendancies in terms of damage, Berserker, with no drawback, and in fact one of the best sustains. So I think let's go Inquisitor. Inquisitor is a good question. So I haven't even covered that yet. So Inquisitor, one of the cool things about Inquisitor, a lot of people like Inevitable Judgment. Critical strikes ignore enemy, monster, elemental resistance. Not only that, but you get a substantial amount of crit chance for scaling your attributes, which is cool. And then, of course, there is also the regen, but that's not terribly relevant. We sustain just fine through Leech. I've never had any trouble. And maybe Augury of Penitence kind of comes up, but these two nodes never come up. So yeah, let's go over Inquisitor. Inevitable Judgment, that's the important question to ask. So Inquisitor is insanely well suited for spells because spells have a very low base crit chance, usually somewhere in between 5. On the upper end, 7, usually 6 though, 5 or 6. So all the extra crit chance actually benefits the Inquisitor quite a bit. In fact, spells have a much lower access to increased to elemental penetration. So elemental penetration is available on Forces of Nature. It's available on stuff like Fangs of Frost. Like, it's widely available with attacks, arcing blows. And more importantly, it's also available on weapon. Right here we have 15%. The crafted version is 12 to 14%, and I think it's 14 to 16% if you, like I did here, use either a Veiled Chaos Orb, or if you use an Ashling, like when she's level 4, the leader of your group when you kill the mastermind, or the leader of research specifically. At level 3 she becomes level 4, and you get to slam it on with that, and you have a chance to do that. It's 14 to 16. That means for very easily, and going through nodes and pathing through an area you already have access straight up to 22 to 26 penetration. The biggest bosses in the game have a baseline magic resist. We can pull this up here in configuration. We put this to Uber and Pinnacle bosses. Let me go ahead and switch the elusive effect back up to average, 110%. Oh, not Uber bosses, sorry. We'll just go up to Pinnacle bosses. Okay, so if you look at Guardian Pinnacle bosses here, they have 50% elemental resistance. That means from this node, you are getting 50% penetration against Pinnacle bosses. We are through our, and since it ignores it, it can't be modified any further. So we're making up for more than half of that simply by having or right around half of it on average, simply with Forces of Nature and our weapon craft, which we're always going to get at some point. Not only that, but we can also apply other effects that lower resistances that will continue to benefit from, like the 18% from exposure. So let's say we're averaging, let's just say it's a max crafted roll, it's 24%. Adding this, it's 42%. We're already making up for 80% of the benefit of that there inherently from stuff that we would already want to take. That is rather large. There's other ways we can get penetration as well. There's also like curses that Inquisitor can't further modify. Like if I wanted to run a gloves with the, if I wanted to do like Whisper of Doom's double curse with elemental weakness on hit, for instance, that's doable. Snowforged is another thing which is close by or something we can anoint. It can just continue to be modified, and we can not only match eventually through gearing, also Corrupts on Jewels also can give penetration. So we can not only match Inquisitor and very easily reach 80% of the benefit from its most powerful node with attacks. Like I said, this is much harder to do on spells, which is why Inquisitor is so good with spells. But we can actually eventually overtake the benefit that Inquisitor has from ignoring resistances. And we don't need the increased crit chance because we can very easily, through gearing, because we have Nightblade and Assassin's Mark on hit, reach close to 100% crit chance completely without that. So that is the reason why we would not take that. Those are the two big ones I always get asked, Raider, Inquisitor. I'm planning on playing through a bunch of different classes, and I've already played through Guardian and Occultist. I think other things that have like potential are like self-chill Elementalist, because we can get up to 40% action speed and we don't have to run Yoke of Suffering, which opens up other unique amulet options for us with Shaper of Storms. And we also get easier scaling on our shocks and like guaranteed high shocks. So I think there are other interesting options, but I think the most generically powerful and easy to scale one is going to be Trickster. Boy, that ended up being a lot more explanation than I thought. So I'm going to try to make this one shorter so it's not an insanely long video. But what to level with? So this one I don't really need to pull up POB. It's possible Spectral Helix will still be the best, because even at 100% damage effectiveness, it's hitting bosses multiple times. We're talking usually 2 times per attack. It also has a 10% attack speed multiplier. So you can kind of think of its base attack multiplier being 220%, which is still much higher than most gems that are available at this stage of the game. Because it hits twice with an attack speed multiplier. However, the numbers of the actual hit will be lower. So if you have physical damage, like say you get an all, for instance, with like 60% physical damage scaling. So an all is a level 20 or level 12 claw. So you'd get that right before Merveil. And you get and you decide to use this, and you're doing mostly physical damage. You have added cold to give you some damage, but a lot of your damage is going to be physical. The base armor from Merveil is, when I put it through calculations, going to mitigate probably close to 40% of the physical damage that you do. Compared to, because the way that armor scales, it basically scales exponentially based on the hit. The higher the hit, the less armor affects it relative to it. So like you have to have much higher armor numbers to match basically big physical hits. If you have no additional physical damage mitigation or, scaling change. This works for monsters too. So basically, the lower damage effectiveness is going to mean Merveil mitigates more. So it's hard to say if it'll still be the strongest, but in theory, especially if you have which is mitigated less severely, kind of, I guess, like added elemental damage to your weapon. Like if you get like elemental damage on a necklace or something, like 1 to 17 lightning damage on an amulet of some sort, or like additional elemental damage on an all that you get through, slamming an essence on it or something. Then it might be better, but like just kind of baseline might end up being a little bit worse. But it still might be the best skill if you want to stick with claws, I guess is the dirty part of it. Frost Blades. Frost Blades, I played 3 times through solo self-found hardcore, completely fresh start, migrating my character each time, so I didn't have anything in my stash to help me, just stuff I found off the ground. And I did it 3 times all the way through Act 4 in the last day or so. During those 3 runs, I just ran Frost Blades each time, and I did not switch to any other leveling skill. And I also did 1 run where I tested Spark and 1 run where I tested Explosive Trap. I also went back and used Reeve. So here are kind of my findings on that. I thought using Frost Blades in its current form, which is going to be at level 1, 10% weaker. At Merveil, at level 1, the new Frost Blades will be 10% stronger. At gem level 5, which is level 12, right around the time you'll fight Merveil, it'll be 12% more damage than you would currently do with Frost Blades with the new one. But even without these buffs, I thought it felt fine. Merveil was about a 1.5-minute kill compared to Spectral Helix, which is literally like probably 30 seconds, even with her phase and everything. So, but like I said, Spectral Helix is going to go way down. Frost Blades is going to go up a little bit. They might meet in the middle. It's possible that Frost Blades will be they might both take like a little over a minute to clear Merveil now, for instance. So yeah, the biggest hurdles I ran into were Merveil, Vault, Oversoul, and Piety, which all felt slow. Dominus also kind of was slow. It didn't feel that bad though. For some reason Piety felt harder than Dominus, and I'm not really sure why. Might have been because of a weapon upgrade I got at that time, like new bases becoming available, whereas I didn't really get any good new bases in the beginning. Also might have been I didn't like pay too much attention. It might have been that I didn't get a 4-link before Piety and got it in between Piety and Dominus, but I just made a note that Piety was difficult, or somewhat difficult. It wasn't that bad. All the mini bosses, especially through Act 2, I was expecting like Weaver to be hard with Frost Blades. It wasn't really that hard. Once I got my first Ascendancy and Multi-Strike, it already felt good. Once you get up to that point, you're already going to be doing like 18% or so more damage with Frost Blades with its new numbers than you're currently doing. So honestly, you should probably just breeze through the game starting through middle of Act 4 once you have your first Ascendancy. So I don't think you need to use a leveling skill past the middle of Act 4 anymore. Like previously, I would recommend still using Spectral Helix as at least a gem swap all the way towards Blood Aqueducts. I think now you can just use it. But Spark and Explosive Trap did feel all right. I also tried Reeve, which has higher damage effectiveness, but boy, level 1 Reeve, before you start getting the base area from its later levels, feels awful. Really, really bad. You have to be standing right on top of things to hit them until you get your stacks up. And even then, it's like, so basically when Merveil pops up, you need to be standing like right on top of her and kind of spin around her a little bit so she doesn't shoot you. She also drops like your area stuff. And then you have to keep all of the stacks up through the fight. So while you do a little bit more damage with Reeve, it still feels so bad. I highly would not recommend it compared to the 18% weapon range you get with Frost Blades. But I think if you do want to level through the first 3 acts with Spark and Explosive Trap until you get Multi-Strike in your first Ascendancy, I think that's perfectly fine or viable. There's probably other things you could level that are available, like Lightning Trap, for instance. You get that at level 12 too. Also probably pretty good. Definitely very good for clear regardless. You could try that. But right now, my recommendation is going to be that you just stick through Frost Blades through the whole process. I think it'll be fine. Yeah, I really do think it'll be just fine. Might feel a little clunkier than some skills. Might be a little lower damage, but I think it'll be good enough. Especially if you're kind of used to playing that kind of play style. I think it'll still kill things faster than some builds, regardless. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I have to talk about. This ended up being way longer than I actually thought it was going to end up being, but hope you enjoyed anyway. This has been Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming. As soon as POB is updated, I'll update my league start, my 1 through Pinnacle run through. Just a couple of changes to the tree and some additional notes and slight tweaks to the leveling tree because I figured out how to make the build a little higher damage to make those earlier stages a little smoother. So look forward to those. This has been Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming, and I will see you next time. Bye.